Hello, I'm Robert. I'm going to do another short debunk of these false prophecies from Nostradamus because people are still being scared of them. So the first thing is, you shouldn't be scared of any of the prophecies for either Nostradamus or Baba Vanga or any of these things like that. Nostradamus made only one prophecy for our times. That was about a pope accidentally doing something that led to a war restarting in July 1999. And this didn't happen. And his reputation for being so accurate is based mainly on people making up prophecies that he didn't make after the event and claiming that he made those prophecies. And others are about reinterpreting very vague prophecies to fit events after they happen. They never manage to do it the other way around, to predict these extraordinary things before they happen using Nostradamus. So he can't be used to predict the future. So now, if we look at these things that are, go back to the beginning. So the story that's running in sensationalist press is based on a website that did the same thing in 2020. In 2020, the same website claimed, falsely, that Nostradamus predicted, and let's look at some of their predictions. They prophesied that Putin would be assassinated in 2020. They prophesied that the Queen would die in 2020, the Queen of England, of Britain. They prophesied that Pope Francis would die in 2020. They prophesied that a member of Trump's family would die in a car accident again in 2020. Now, I know it's the 30th. I'm doing this on the 30th. We have one more day of 2020 to go. It is not plausible that all those things happen on the 31st of December. So I think we can say quite confidently that these are false prophecies. Now look at what they prophesy for 2021. They say that there will be a zombie apocalypse. Zombies going around all over the world, causing mayhem. A zombie is impossible. You can't walk, you probably know yourself, you can't walk or run for more than a few minutes without breathing. And not at all, we actually depend on oxygen even for a few seconds of consciousness. If you can walk without and run without breathing for a while because you've got oxygen in your lungs, which goes into your blood. Without that, without this blood circulating, then you can't do anything. A dead person can't move because they can't breathe and their heart has stopped pumping blood. Zombies are impossible. 2, we have plenty of food. They claim that it's going to be a biblical famine. We have plenty of food and the farmers are not impacted during the COVID pandemic. Then there's no problem with physical distancing if you're a farmer in a tractor in a field. They weren't impacted by all the measures to protect against COVID-19. And it turns out that the transport of food is very automated, and that also wasn't impacted. Only for a few things like mangoes, then bananas actually benefited because people wanted to buy lots of bananas because they perceived them as being longer lasting when they were panic buying. Anyway, so we have plenty of food. And then the Muslim religion, there's a thing that people who live in Christian countries, sometimes they have kind of paranoid fear that it's going to change from their familiar Christianity to a Muslim majority country. And if you're Christian, then that can be quite scary. So the Muslim religion is growing, but so is the Christian religion. So it's not just the Muslims that are growing. The Muslims are a little bit faster. But the fertility of Muslims is going down quickly, just as for Christians. And the main reason why fertility is high for Muslims is because they are poor and refugees. There are some very wealthy Muslim countries, but a lot of very poor Muslims in the world. And they have high child mortality rates, and the same as for all the other countries when your mortality rate is high, when you have difficulty finding food, when you have not sure if your children are growing up to adulthood, when you don't have a pension, then the parents choose to have more children, because then they have someone to look after the farm, even if many of them are sickly. That is basically what goes on there. And then the other way around, once it's very wealthy, then people tend to have very few children and invest a lot more in the few children they have. And the Muslims who immigrate to the EU have their fertility rate drop down for the next generation. And the ones who immigrate in, a lot of them are refugees, and that's why they have a high fertility rate, or they come from countries with low incomes. The projection for the EU is 7.4% to 14% by 2050. It is not majority Muslim by 2030. And this depends on the amount of immigration. Zero immigration would be 7.4%. And that is an increase, but that would be from people who have recently arrived in the EU, who still have a high fertility rate because they've only recently got there. If you look at the ones that are permanently there, then it's very close. If the second generation Muslims in the EU have very similar fertility rate to the ones who are native, the second generation of any other ethnic group. Then the worst, they claim there's going to be a devastating solar storm, and this was a basic analysis just a short time, just a few years back, a decade or so ago, in fact slightly more recently than that. But we now know that first of all, it'd be very localized. The solar storm in only certain places where it's spread, depending on the underlying bedrock. Then only some places where you would actually get these power cuts, and shown in bright yellow in these. I think some of these show different aspects of what would lead to a possible power cut. And so there's only certain regions in the United States where you can even have a power cut with the most extreme solar storms, we now know. And then the devices that are connected to the very long power cables, that you have to be connected to a very long power cable to be affected by the very weak magnetic field changes of a solar storm. And these are much more hardened than was realized in the earlier studies, because there's only been one power cut in Quebec in 1989, and since then the devices, they've learned from that, and the grid is much more hardened than it was in 1989. So it might even be none, even with the worst possible solar storm or short-term power cuts, especially since most of them are triply redundant. There are no comet warnings. We would notice a comet by now already if it was a big comet headed for Earth in 2021. And the long period comets are very rare anyway, that they pass anywhere near Earth. The closest any has come is Lexel comets, 6 times distance of the Moon in 1770. That's very far away of the long period comet. They mention the asteroid 2009 KF1, claim that's going to hit us. And this actually orbits between Mars and Jupiter. It never comes as close to Earth than Mars. You're safer from 2009 KF1 than you are from Mars, which of course is not going to hit Earth. There's no possibility of it coming anywhere near Earth in the orbits it's in at present. And then number 6, they claim that soldiers are going to have neural implants in the United States this year. This may well be due to Elon Musk's neural net, which is hugely overhyped. We don't know how we think. We can't read thoughts. There are no memory locations in our brain. There's not even any digital data in the brain. There are no noughts and ones there. And there's nothing to do with logical operations or arithmetic. It's not understood how we think, how we'll be able to calculate, how we remember things. There's a resemblance to a neural net, but neural nets can't do these things. Neural nets are very good at recognizing images. They can't do logical operations. They can't do arithmetic. They can't remember anything. And that's really not very much like a neural net. So its Neuralink it's useful. It's based on research for treating people with Alzheimer's, and so it is likely that it will help people with Alzheimer's to set down short-term memories. It doesn't record memories. It records the signal that is used to help you to set down memories. And then it may be possible to use this device to move a mouse about on the screen, but it would be just a very crude thing, similar to the way that Stephen Hawking could control it with muscles in his cheek. And I'm pretty sure most people will just use their hand rather than try and do it with changing their brain somehow. And it is brain surgery, and I think the uptake of brain surgery in order to be able to move a mouse around by somehow thinking in a slightly different way is going to be very, very low. It will be useful for Alzheimer's patients. Then there's the quake, they say, in California is impossible. And indeed, San Andreas is an impossible scenario. You can't have a mega tsunami, it's just a side slip on land. And so there's no way it can cause any kind of tsunami. And there's no way that the California is going to fall into the sea. It is possible to have serious damage, and if you're in California, do learn to protect yourself from earthquakes. But the thing that they predict is absolutely impossible. And there's no reason to have an earthquake in California next year rather than in 2020. You shouldn't, obviously, with this crackpot site, you shouldn't be scared of an earthquake in 2021. And then the Pope they say will help bring the Catholic Church closer to the needs of the people. Well, Pope Francis may well be a good person for doing that, but do bear in mind that these people prophesied that he would die in 2020, and that didn't happen. So that's quite a plausible thing that he is helping in that way, but not because of this website, independently. So I hope this is enough so that you can see it's just a crackpot website, and the sensationalist press are doing their usual thing of just taking something that's totally crackpot, no basis to it at all, and then claiming it is some big scary new story. And the likes of the Daily Express or whatever, or the Mirror, or whatever it is that is running this story. So just ignore this Nostradamus story. It's just not true at all. And so I'll just go back to the beginning and remind you again, Nostradamus made only one prophecy for our times, and this didn't happen. And you should ignore all of Nostradamus' prophecies. Indeed, there's no evidence at all that prophecy works in modern times. The Pope doesn't have a prophet. Even the Pope doesn't have a prophet. He doesn't have a personal prophet to assist him in with his decisions. The President doesn't have a personal prophet. The Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, where I live, we don't have prophets. We don't have a professional prophet to advise the government. This used to be a role way back a couple of thousand years ago, but we no longer see any need in our society for having professional prophets. And so you don't need a personal prophet, and you don't need to go to looking for prophecies. We have science instead. And for instance, if you want to know about the weather, don't go to a prophet, go to the weather forecaster. It's much more effective. They get it right. And they tell you the amount of uncertainty. So I would advise people just not to listen to prophets at all. There's no evidence at all that it benefits your life to listen to prophets. And if you want to do astrology for other reasons, then you can say, I think astrology, it maybe does have some benefit in the sense of giving you new ways of thinking about things. So if you think something could happen in a particular day, maybe you're open to the possibility of that happening, and you wouldn't have been if you hadn't read your horoscope for that day. So I'm not saying don't do your horoscope, but take it a little bit lighter and not take it so seriously, because there's no evidence that prophecy works in our times. We don't have professional prophets. Well, I just mentioned Jean Dixon, who's the one that's well known in the United States. Then I mentioned that in the actual article. She worked, the way her prophecies worked is she just scattered, prophesied all sorts of extraordinary things, like world peace, and then World War III on particular years when it didn't happen, obviously, that's way in the past, and that Russia would beat the United States to the moon, and all sorts of extraordinary things. And amongst that, she did a few prophecies that if you squinted them sideways, they sort of vaguely resemble something that actually happened. And that is basically where things like these websites like that work. They prophesy lots and lots of things every year, and then one year one of them is approximately right. They say, look, I'm a prophet, I managed to predict that thing. But I mean, for instance, prophesying the Queen of England is going to die, if you keep on doing that she's in her 90s, I think, and for another 20, 30 years, if you keep doing it every year for 30 years, and it's pretty certain she's going to die in one of those years. And then you can say, oh, I'm a prophet, but you aren't. You're just someone who by random chance that happens. And popes, they're quite elderly, so their term lasts quite a short time. So it's that again, it's, if you keep doing that every year, prophesying that elderly people are going to die, then at some point your prophecy, one of your prophecies is likely to turn out to be accurate, in inverted commas. Not really, because you're just guessing. Anyway, so I'll upload this, and hopefully this helps some of you who've got scared by this. I've got a longer version which goes into much more detail, and I'll give a link to the longer version, and then it's at the end of this. There's the longer version where I go into all of these in much more detail. Anyway, hopefully this helps you.